Hi, welcome to Enrollment Management Strategies Leveraging AI and Analytics at Valdosta State University. My name is Brian Haugabrook. We'll be going through a few slides today talking about a use case at Valdosta State University. But first, let's do a few introductions with our participants today.
Hello, my name is Rodney Carr, and I'm the Vice President for Student Success at Valdosta State University.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Hogan. I am the Director of Admissions here at Valdosta State.
Hi, everyone. Pete Fritz. I'm a Senior Manager in Deloitte's Higher Education Consulting Practice.
And again, Brian Haugabrook, Specialist Leader at Deloitte. And on the agenda today, what we're going to do, get an introduction from the leaders that we have here today from Valdosta State University. We're going to talk about a use case that we did working in partnership with Valdosta State and Deloitte with our Candidate 360 solution. And at the end, we're going to do some interview questions with Ryan and Dr. Carr. And Ryan, I'll turn it over to you to do the introduction.
Sure. So just a little bit about us at Valdosta State, and I guess I should preface it that I am a graduate from here. So if I start getting excited about some of the things, the school spirit remains strong with me. Valdosta State was established in 1906. First set of classes was held a few years later in 1913 as a two-year college for women, and then has grown into where we are today. In 1993, or in the early 1950s, we became Valdosta State College. In 1993, we achieved university status. And then in 2013, we became a comprehensive institution. To date, we have 12,300 students, and that's both undergraduate and graduate level students. Across 6 academic colleges, there are 55 bachelor's programs, 40 master's degree, doctoral programs. The other thing that we're very proud of is that it is a traditional college in the sense that there's over 200 different student organizations that range from Greek, athletic, intramural, religious organizations. We are national champions with our athletics. We are a Division II school. Our football program is the 2004, 2007, 2012, and most recently the 2018 Division II national champions in football. You can see the awesome picture down there as well. The other thing that we're proud of at Valdosta State is that we bring students in from all over the world. We are located in Valdosta, Georgia, which is 15 miles from the Georgia-Florida line. And a lot of people think that it's just South Georgia people that come to school here, but it's definitely not. We have students from all over the world come to Valdosta State, and mainly is for those academic programs. We offer things that are very unique to us, including American Sign Language and English interpreting, which we are the only school in Georgia to offer a bachelor's degree, and one of 30 schools in the nation. So excellent academic programs, different things like that, which makes us who we are.
All right, so it's my turn at this point. So some of the challenges that we're all facing in enrollment is how do we constantly find new prospects and how do we reach out to those? And especially during about March when all of a sudden everybody's getting shut down. Now what happens when you're taking a traditional face-to-face student and now you're pushing them to 100% online? We went into a mild state of panic. I curled up in the fetal position underneath my desk, was rocking back and forth for several days. And so we started to try to figure out we're gonna have to improve our marketing. We're gonna have to improve our recruiting, not just of our traditional students. Traditional students are on the decline. The birth rate is gonna be dropping down. We all know in 2024 in enrollment that there's gonna be a decline in the birth rate right there. So we started looking at and saying, we've gotta be able to know how do we market to non-traditional students. And we all try to rein that in to where we don't want to reach out to the millions of those across the country. We would love to, but none of us have those level budgets to do that. But then we also know it's a lot easier and cheaper to hold on to a student than it is to recruit a new one. And so we started to really focus in on retention and progression. Some of those strategies that we used, I worked with Brian at Deloitte to come up with our own retention formula. In enrollment, we all have enrollment formulas for projecting enrollment for new students and for returning students that we base our budgets on. We wanted a formula that said, what are the top 5 things that impact the number of students that stay with us and return back to us? And so we were able to work through that, and we came up with a formula. We identified those 5 things, and now our retention strategies are really centered around those 5 things that we do. One of the other things we're trying to do, especially with Ryan and admissions, is increase that aid package and that scholarship package. One of the main things that we decided to do was to truly, how do we figure out where that non-traditional population, where are they? We all see the census numbers. We know that they're out there. Well, how do we narrow that pool down to, just like we do for traditional students, how do we narrow that pool down to who we think would be successful at Valdosta State University? And that's truly where we had partnered with Deloitte to do that, in that new prospector identifier model that we came up with. You see some of our numbers there. We had a 1,000 student increase in our freshmen. That was Ryan and his team working amazingly hard all summer. And then our 1-year retention rate is now up another 3.5%. This past year, that's up a total of 9.5% over 2 years. And so we've had some increases there. One of the things you see there also is our adult enrollment increased by 2%. That is something we're going to have to drive more towards and there's more adult learners out there than there are prospective students that are traditional age students. So that's truly why we started this partnership.
And part of what we've done with working with Valdosta State is, first understanding the challenge that they have, also the strategies that they've been using to increase not only traditional students, but non-traditional students. And so what we work with them on is, how do we leverage data and insights, not just data that's collected at the institution, but how do we extend that data set to really bring in insights across the country, but more importantly, for Valdosta State within their service region in South Georgia. And so we brought to the table what we call our lifestyle data set, where we're able to now score various households across the country, but in South Georgia, to really look at what are going to be some high-fit students that are likely not just to apply at Valdosta State, but that can also be successful in their degree pursuits. And so we bring a lot of AI and analytics to the table, but more importantly, what we focus on is really collaborating with the institution, working with those experts, bringing together some insights from the Deloitte team. So it's more of a collaborative approach in how we can solve these problems. One of the things we do with all of our engagements is the role of an inside advisor, somebody who has worked in higher education most of their career, who really understands those challenges, but also how do you connect the work in higher education with the insights, with the innovations that's being done across other industries. And so that is where we truly see our value in really helping institutions bring together expertise, analytics, AI, innovations that's happening across the country. The next slide, what I'll go through, sort of talking more about how do we really narrow this focus down. Rodney mentioned really, you got millions of households. You can't possibly market that with any size budget. So how do you really zoom in to really have a narrower focus on the households that are likely going to give you that return? And so our lifestyle data on every household, we have about 230 million plus adults in this country. At each household level, we also have information about what age children in the home, not any other information on the kids other than there's a child under 18 living in that home. But what we can tell about these homes and households is really helping institutions understand where there are prospects out there, but also we do a lot with understanding aid strategies. So how do institutions strategically offer aid? How do they maximize and optimize their aid strategies so that they can support and provide financial assistance to institutions? A lot of the insights we have, not just on home ownership, lifestyle behaviors, spending patterns within the home, we have synthetic variables to where we have over 150 models in how we can now do predict certain lifestyle traits, behaviors. One thing that we can do even in higher ed, which is important, is understanding financial need of students even before they fill out the FAFSA. That's going to be important, particularly now in the time of COVID, where we're seeing extended impacts of this pandemic, where families are going to be heavily impacted. Unemployment rates has spiked and it still hasn't come back down to where it needs to be. So having these insights early on before students fill out and parents fill out these FAFSA forms really help institutions be proactive in how they support them, but also, again, optimizing their aid strategies. Other ways this data is used is understanding and what are those high fit prospects, whether it's local, whether it's an adult strategy, is which Valdosta State is using, or just a traditional approach, out of state strategies with pulling more domestic students from across the country. Where are those clusters of high fit prospects? So not only can you target them, but now how do you optimize your marketing strategies? What markets do you go in that you may have not known before? Again, as Rodney mentioned this year, you're having fewer traditional students. So it's really institutions are gonna be more proactive, expand what they're currently doing to try to still meet those enrollment gains and enrollment metrics that they have in place. What we want to do next, really excited to have Rodney and Ryan here. Want to go through just a few questions to really kind of talk about, given the impact of COVID. Again, in March, as Rodney, you mentioned, things had to change instantly. Strategies changed. You could no longer go out and meet students. I know Valdosta has a lot of orientation, open houses that, Valdosta State's a very beautiful campus. So a lot of times getting students to see the campus is a huge plus in getting them to come. But really want to talk, Ryan, kind of the first question to you. When you think about, the use of data, the use of technology, that has been important when it comes to admissions. Can you talk about how you have been successful with leveraging technology in your role?
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. And you touched on this a little bit when you were going through, some of the statistics and those sort of things, but really looking at some predictive analytics. What does our students look like, And so that really helps us from taking a shotgun approach when you're looking at purchasing names and prospects and that sort of thing to more of a sniper angle is, let's make sure we're buying the name of the students that actually look like where they're coming from, all of those different things. So looking at the data on the front side before we start search strategies and things like that, that's definitely where some data came in. Also, we have our individual goals for the institution of how many applications my department processes, how many students we accept, and then inevitably how many students we enroll. But we're really able to even go down to more of a granular level on putting what we call KPIs or key performance indicators on each one of the counties in all of our target markets. So, and we use that data that comes from how many students are there. Just because we brought in 40 students from a county one year, well, their enrollment might have declined. What does that mean in terms of our goals? So we were able to partner with our own information technology and institutional research to determine what those data points might be. So at a granular level, that contributes to the higher, the bigger picture. So those are definitely some of the ways we were looking at data. And then with technology, one of the things that we found early before pandemics and things like that is it's almost impossible to over communicate with incoming students. Going to college can be very confusing, no matter if this is your first child going or you're on your own doing it, or you're a non-traditional student doing it on your own. It's almost impossible to over communicate. So we've really got some very good technology points in place to be able to communicate with our students, whether that's through print mail, whether that's through email. We were able, some of the AI technology that you were talking about, we've implemented with texting capabilities. We have our own chat bot called Blaze, which is part of our mascot, where students can ask it questions. And what's interesting about it is that it answers it based on a knowledge base that we've built. What's even more interesting is if it gets a question it doesn't know, it routes it to one of our staff members. And then when they answer it, it learns that. So it gets smarter over time. And so those are some of the ways that we've been using technology and data up until this point to kind of help leverage what we do.
What do you see, Ryan, going into the future? And I think, beforehand, you were saying, you've been now in this almost 15 years, a little over 15 years. Given just the impact of this pandemic, how do you see the importance of these tools coming up for your fall 21 class?
Yeah, definitely the communication piece is it's a big aspect of it. But what we're spending our time right now looking at, and I think as we all know, is that life as we all knew it changed in March. And so SATs were being canceled, and it seemed like almost every day we would set a plan and say, okay, here's what's happening. And then something would happen that would disrupt that plan, and then we have to redo our strategy. So we really brought in a large number of students in a short window. And so really trying to look at the entire timeline of it and go, okay, now that we, the SAT, as we're test optional, we're able to admit students without tests. What are those things that we need to get in place early? And those things that need to kind of be talked about now. And so that's really, we're spending a lot of time talking about communication plans with different departments. What's the best way to communicate those things? How can our area, and we leverage technology and some of those things to look to help do those things for some of those areas. The other thing that we always want to make sure we try to always understand is that we talk to our students as individuals. What we learned at the start of the pandemic was we were about to host one of our open houses, like you mentioned, and we usually bring in about 800 students, 2,000 people total. And we went, okay, how do we do this virtually? And then we went, nobody really wants to attend something virtually with 2,000 other people. So we looked at our virtual tour strategy, but more or less making it a one-on-one ability for the students to talk to us about their majors, their hopes, their dreams. So really looking at our communication strategies and keep it at an individual level. That's kind of what we've been looking at too. The other thing that really drives everything that we do is we find, a lot of schools could admit all of these students and they had the same requirements as we did. And Dr. Carr and I were even talking about this early this morning before we walked into a meeting, is what made us a little bit different in terms of that greater acceptance number for our freshman class. And some of these communication strategies, I wholly believe, was what the difference maker was. The research actually showed schools that were not communicating with their students often about, hey, here's what's going on, here's what's happening, got marked off a student's list. And so again, I go back to that communication. You almost can't over communicate in a time like this. And so we're going to continue doing that.
Dr. Carr, that kind of piggybacking on what Ryan's saying, earlier you mentioned about, the need to increase non-traditional enrollment. You may not be able to just buy names like you would from an undergraduate strategy. So can you talk about your strategy and communication, and how are you going to really focus on engaging the non-traditional student going into the future with COVID-19 impact?
So the slide you just showed, kind of the more we know about somebody, the easier it is to communicate to them. And so we took the same strategy that Ryan's team uses for traditional students of, here's the group that has gone to school here and they have been successful throughout the years. We're going to aim back at that same group in high school and narrow our pool this way, but we go after them and say, we know you're going to be successful. So we're doing the same thing when we're looking at non-traditional students. Those students that are non-traditional students that have come here and they have been successful, now we know who that group is. We partnered with you to get that data, so now we're going right after that group. And the one thing that we have discovered is high contact. In March, when everybody went home and we went completely virtual, we put together a concierge coach model in about 48 hours and ended up with 294 volunteers from the university that volunteered to reach out to all of our students that went home. Every week we called them, every week, how are you doing? How are you doing? Is everything going okay? Well, and they're having trouble logging in. We sent them a laptop, we sent them a MiFi, whatever we could do to help them stay connected. And so we took that same model, and then Ryan has a non-traditional recruiter that is there and has an easy ability to connect. So that person's also reaching out to them. And now we took that same concierge model and we've taken that into our adult learner piece and our online college, to where now we're doing high contact concierge. It's the Grey's Anatomy version of your person is what it boils down to.
Thanks, Dr. Carr. Pete, I know we just have a few minutes left. You know, Pete, you've done a lot of work across the country in supporting institutions with the student life cycle management, enrollment management. What are you seeing as sort of the trends in the way higher education institutions are leveraging analytics and AI to accomplish their enrollment management goals?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm happy to say a lot of what Ryan and Dr. Carr have been talking about, I think, are reflected in what we've seen in a lot of leading institutions that have been able to navigate this situation successfully. I think what it boils down to, and this does reflect what we've already heard, is sort of three big categories of where institutions are using more advanced analytics, are using more third-party data to be better informed about their students and their pipelines. The first is around this concept of personalization. One size doesn't fit all. We want to be able to meet people where they are, talk to them about the things that are interesting to them, and engage with them over the channels they're most comfortable with. Sometimes that's going to be phone, sometimes that's social media, sometimes that's email. So understanding what's going to be most impactful for each individual prospect and building our strategies around that is something that I think we've seen a lot of successful universities work towards and is all the more critical during this pandemic crisis. The second, I think, related to that, and we've hit on it multiple times here, is that maximization of limited resources. If anything, belts have gotten tighter, budgets have gone down. How do we continue to do more with less in a more competitive and chaotic enrollment environment? And I think where we see a lot of leading institutions and successful institutions using analytics is figuring out how to do that. What if I have a dean who's willing to make 20 or 30 phone calls to students to try and get them to enroll? Who are the students we should be focused on? Who should be on that list that goes to the dean so we maximize the ROI of that individual's time? Which students might see a real change in an additional or an incremental $500, $1,000 of institutional aid? Where is that going to make a meaningful difference in students' ability to either enroll initially or to retain and stick around? Versus where do other students, where will that not have quite as big an impact? So being able to use analytics at the aggregate level, but at the individual level as well, to really fine tune those type of resource management strategies, I think is critical. And then the last part, which is really evolving in real time, is seeing how successful the engagement strategies are, especially with how much things have shifted in the last 6 months. The way we're going into this enrollment cycle, not having campus visits, not having high school visits, and needing to engage students in a lot of different ways. How do we use analytics and information on a real-time basis to understand what's moving the needle? Was a virtual tour successful? If a student had a digital engagement with a counselor, has that increased or decreased their interest in our institution? Being able to see what's working, what's not, and being really agile like that is unfortunately something I think everyone's going to be dealing with for the foreseeable future.
All right. Thank you, Pete. And Dr. Carr, Mr. Hogan, definitely want to thank you guys from Valdosta State University for being on this session today for EDUCAUSE. And I really appreciate everybody who's attending this session virtually. So thank you all. Have a great day.
Absolutely.